Does your engine run rough like this one? In this video, I'm going to show you how to diagnose and fix the problem. The most common reason for an engine running rough is faulty spark plugs or coils. And at 1aauto.com, they sell spark plugs and coils for all makes and models. If you need these or other parts for your vehicle, click the link in the description and head over to 1aauto.com. The reason why your engine is running rough and your check engine light is flashing is because your vehicle has a misfire, or the engine has a misfire. This vehicle happens to have a 4-cylinder engine, so only 3 of the cylinders are firing properly. If you had a V8 and there was a misfire, you'd only have 7, and obviously with a 6-cylinder, you might only have 5. Or you could have multiple cylinders not misfiring, so you could have 2 cylinders that aren't working, or even random cylinders not working. So the best thing to do is stop the vehicle, stop driving the vehicle when you have a flashing check engine light, because you can cause other damage to the vehicle. What you want to do is take a scan tool and scan the codes just to get a base where you're looking from. So if we had a P0300, that just confirms that we have a misfire, but we could also have a P0302, which would mean the 2nd cylinder is the cause of the misfire, and that gives us a little more information. If you have a professional scan tool like this, you're going to be able to graph the misfires, and it's going to help you save time and be able to figure out, narrow down what's going on, which cylinder's misfiring. If you don't have one like this, let's go through some of the techniques you can use that might take a little bit longer, but will still get the job done. For a vehicle to run properly, you need air, fuel, spark, and compression. Now, the easiest thing to check is for spark, whether you have something wrong with the ignition system, whether it's a bad coil or a spark plug, and that's what we're going to look into. So we need to access the coils and spark plugs. There may be some type of air intake above everything, and that's what we're going to take off on this vehicle. Sometimes the 4-cylinder engines, everything's all out in the open, and it's pretty easy to get to. But this will just take a couple minutes. Pull this off. Then we have a cover. Take the cover off. And it's nice and easy to see. There's all the coils. So we have a 4-cylinder engine, so this is cylinder 1. Well, this is the coil for cylinder number 1, number 2, number 3, and number 4. This is how this works. We have a coil on top of a spark plug. So the computer sends a signal to the coil, tells it to ignite the spark plug. It sends high electrical voltage down to the plug, and then the plug will send a spark right across that gap, and that's what's going to ignite the fuel. So something in this system isn't working, whether there's a bad coil or a faulty coil or a faulty spark plug. So we know these coils are all the same and all the spark plugs are all the same. So what we can do is take one of the coils and swap it with another one. So let's do that. And disconnect the connector. Oh, that coil came apart. Sometimes that happens. They'll rip and the boot will stay in there, especially if someone didn't put dielectric grease on the boot. That could be our problem. It's okay. And we'll swap it with this cylinder, number 3, because we don't have a misfire on cylinder number 3. Plug it in there, put the bolt in. Take the assumed bad coil, put it in cylinder number 3, plug it in, put the bolt in. Now we can start the engine and see if our misfire moves to cylinder number 3. There we go. So we still have a misfire on cylinder number 3. So in that case, that would mean that coil is bad. Whenever you have a bad coil, it's always a good idea to replace all of them. If you have a 4-cylinder, obviously replace 4. If you have an 8-cylinder, replace 8 of them, because one bad coil means the other ones aren't far behind. And while you're in there, you might as well replace the spark plugs, because that could have been the cause of the coil being bad. If the spark plug gap is too much or the spark plug itself is faulty, the coil is going to be working harder, overheating, and that's going to cause the coil to go bad. So we still have a misfire, and the misfire has moved to cylinder number 3 now. Now, one of the indications it's going to tell you that cylinder number 3 is misfiring, instead of a P0302, you now have a P0303. So that's a good indication that you know that that coil would be bad. Now, what if you did not, if the misfire did not move? It was still on 302. The next step would be moving the spark plug. So let's do that. Take the coil out. Just set that aside. Make sure there was nothing down the spark plug hole either. If you have oil or coolant or even debris in there, that could cause a misfire as well. You want to take a look at the spark plug itself, see if there's excessive carbon built up, if the electrode is actually touching the ground side of the spark plug. If this ground tab is completely gone or missing, that's not a good sign. Then there's probably some other type of mechanical damage in your engine that would need to be addressed. If the spark plug gap is completely closed, like this was pushed down, maybe it was dropped when someone was installing it and they did not correct it. But in that case, you would notice that before you know, it's not something you'd be driving for 20,000 miles and then all of a sudden it happened. So take a look at the porcelain. If you see any signs of arcing out on the porcelain, that's an indication that the coil is not sealing properly. It has to seal around the plug properly, and there could be something wrong with the boot. The boot could be ripped. The spark isn't going down to the spark plug itself. It is coming out of the coil and then arcing and grounding out here, and that's why you're going to get a black line. It'll almost look like electricity. So take a look at that and see if there's any cracks in the porcelain as well. So now we'll swap that with another one, swap it with a different cylinder. Take a look at that one, make sure that one looks good. And we'll slide that one in cylinder number 2. That came from cylinder number 1. Always start the spark plug by hand also. Snug it down. And then put the spark plug that we think is bad in cylinder number 1. And put the coils back in because we didn't swap the coils, so that's not going to change. And I'll put the intake back on. For this vehicle, I have to put the intake on because there's a mass airflow sensor, and it really doesn't run at all without the mass airflow sensor hooked up. So that's good. Now I can start the vehicle. After that test, we ended up with a check engine light with a code P0301. So we had a 302 before, and now we have a 301. The only thing we changed was the position of the spark plug. So that tells us that the fault is in the spark plug. You can replace all those spark plugs and your problem should go away. And when replacing spark plugs, you don't want to replace just one. You want to do all of them in the engine, because if one's faulty, then the rest of them are on their way, and it's not going to be something you want to neglect. The electrode is actually touching the ground on that one, so that's why we have a misfire for this vehicle. Now I made that happen. I just dropped it on the ground and caused that to misfire. But what if we still moved that and the misfire was still on number 2? That means your coil and your spark plug are probably not the cause of the misfire. You are either going to have a fuel injector that's faulty, or you may have a mechanical issue, something that's not giving you compression, something to do with the piston or the valves not sealing properly. If your vehicle is not setting a code 301, 302, and so on, if it's only sending the P300 and you still don't have a higher end scan tool so you can't graph it, what you could do is use a spark tester, an inline spark tester like this. Connect this right here, and then connect this side to the spark plug itself. It just takes a lot more time, and then we're going to start the vehicle up and see if we have spark. You can see it sparking really good. Yeah, so you can see it sparking really good. You don't want to touch it, anything near it, because you could ground it and then end up getting zapped. But you can do this for each coil and see if it lights up. If it does not light up while it's running and you don't see a spark coming from the coil itself, then you know that's the coil that's faulty. So those are all things you can do without a misfire graph on your scan tool. So now let's just show you how much easier it is to see a misfire graph. And we'll go through. We have to select the individual cylinders. Current misfire counter, cylinder 1, cylinder 2, cylinder 3, and cylinder 4. So we'll start it up. And it shows you how many times it's misfiring. So cylinder 1 is where our misfire is, and all the other ones are fine. All right, so we know what's wrong with it now, so let's put the new plug in it. Take the old one out. Now I'm going to replace the spark plug with the one we got at 1aauto.com. If you need plugs or other parts, make sure you click the link in the description. And it's always a good idea to check the gap on the spark plug. They do come pre-gapped, but just in case something's not lining up properly. So that looks good. And put it in by hand. Snug it up. Put the coils back in. As you can see, all these coils are new, and these all came from 1aauto.com as well. And put the bolt in. Snug that down. Put this shield back on. And put the intake back in, or the snorkel. Line everything up. Tighten it down. Before we start this up and see how we did, this was an extremely easy engine to diagnose. It's only a 4-cylinder engine. Now let's get into a more difficult engine to diagnose. Here we have a 6-cylinder engine, and there's going to be a cover right here. You know, every vehicle is a little bit different. Obviously, the cover is not going to be the issue. Take the cover off, and you can see the coils right there. Those are the coils that you can access. The problem with the 6-cylinder, most of the time you have an intake plenum that covers the back cylinders or the back coils, and you can't access those. To do that, you would have to take this plenum off, and then once you get this out of the way, then you can access those coils and spark plugs. So it's just a lot more time consuming doing something on an engine like this versus a 4-cylinder engine. So let's take this apart and see how we do this. I'm just going to take some of the hoses off, use some hose clamp pliers. And this hose is on there pretty good. Take the air intake duct off. I'd have to take the air box off. Let's slide that out of the way. We got some more room there. Disconnect some connectors. Just take this bolt out, and that'll eliminate those hoses. One of these hoses is connected to the intake, so we'll have to take that one off. Use some hose pliers, take that off. I can just push that out of the way for now. So that's disconnected. Just gonna feel around the back. There's a hose on the back here, and there's a bracket that you're not going to be able to see. What's this hose go to? All right, so coolant goes through the intake right there, so I don't want to mess around with that. So we're going to leave those hoses attached. And what we're going to do is just disconnect the intake and just slide it to the side so that we could access the other coils. But I do have to take these bolts off in the back. All right, I got those off. That's for the bracket. All these hoses are pretty brittle. And just fold those out of the way. It's a lot of dirt and debris right here. I'm just going to blow it off with a blowgun. Loosen these first. Just trying to get these hoses off with some needle nose pliers. Alright, got one of the clamps moved. Slide those off. Now everything should be loose. Just pull this out of the way. There we go. Now I can access the 3 coils on the back side. This is going to be the same procedure if you had a misfire on this cylinder right here. Let's just say this is cylinder number 3. If it goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, this would be cylinder number 3. Now I'm not sure on this firing order. You don't want to double check just to make sure on the vehicle, because if you just had a misfire in the front, you don't even have to take any of these off. You would have to just take those off. Some vehicles, they're labeled as 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then some alternate. It depends on the vehicle. So if you had a misfire on this cylinder, what I personally would do is take this coil out and the spark plug at the same time and move it to one of the ones in the front, and then see if the misfire moves to the one in the front. Then you know that coil or plug is the fault. And then it's easier to have this all back together, because then you could just swap the coil with one in the front and do it that way. And then you can eliminate it and figure out where your misfire is coming from. Look how smooth that is, like a fine watch. We did a good job. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you subscribe to our channel, ring the bell, turn on all notifications so don't miss any of our videos. Look at that, that's beautiful. Is your engine running rough like this one? In this video, I'm going to show you how to diagnose and fix this problem. Do it one more time. Ready? Is your engine running like this? Well, there's something wrong with it. Obviously, I'm going to show you in this video how to diagnose and fix the problem.